My name is Imri Salahi, and I'm a law professor at Loyola University in New Orleans where I teach courses about arbitration and dispute resolution. New Orleans is also my hometown where I was born and raised, and I'm excited that this section of dispute resolution is hosting its spring meeting here. There is so much history here in New Orleans, and I see conflict deeply rooted in the area's history. I wanted to share some sites that you may want to visit while you are here that are related to dispute resolution, as well as the theme of our annual meeting: innovation, improvisation, and inspiration. And if you are interested in more details about the history of New Orleans and how it came to be, there's an excellent book I recommend titled The Accidental City: Improvising New Orleans by Lawrence Powell. You will see that the history of New Orleans and how it came to be, how it came to exist, it's filled with rivalries and conflict. And this is the best history book about New Orleans I've encountered. From the very beginnings of our city, there was a strong conflict between humans and nature, with humans trying to tame the mighty Mississippi River, nearby Lake Pontchartrain, and the bayous and swampy surrounding land. You will see this in the levee system surrounding and protecting the city. There was also a natural levee near the French Quarter, which provided a good area for trading. And so, since at least going back to the 1700s, there has been a market in the area that you can still visit today called the French Market, where you can sample local food, crafts, and souvenirs. Also, the hotel for our spring conference, the Sheraton Hotel, it sits on Canal Street, which was known as a neutral ground. This main street was a dividing line between the Creole French Quarter side of the city and the city that developed on the other side of Canal Street when a more Anglo-American population arrived after the Louisiana Purchase. And rivalries developed with the newcomers on one side and with the old and established Creole French on the other. So Canal Street came to be viewed and known as a neutral ground between the two rival groups. And this term is now used throughout New Orleans for any median in the city. So while the rest of the country calls this middle section of the street a median, we call it the neutral ground. You can even see this conflict or rivalry in the architecture or design of the city. You will find beautiful French Quarter cafes and restaurants where the gardens and fountains are located in a cozy, secret interior patio. But if you visit the more Anglo-American Garden District on the other side of Canal Street, and there are many self-guided walking tours you can take for the Garden District, you will see beautiful mansions with exterior gardens. The Garden District actually received its name because the large gardens were on the outside of the houses on large lots and very visible, in contrast to the secret interior gardens hidden in the Spanish courtyards in the French Quarter. And as an aside, the French Quarter is a bit of a misnomer. Spain controlled the area for decades, which is why you see the Spanish influence with the ironwork on the balconies and the interior courtyards and stucco in the French Quarter. For the negotiators in our group especially, I recommend going to Jackson Square, where you will see the Cabildo on one side. And you can easily visit Jackson Square and the Cabildo after visiting the nearby Café du Monde by the river for a traditional New Orleans pastry, the beignet. One of the greatest negotiations that changed history on a grand scale involved the Louisiana Purchase. And the Louisiana Purchase was signed on the second floor in the Cabildo in a room called the Sala Capitular. The Cabildo also was the home of the Louisiana Supreme Court for a while. And this is where the Louisiana Supreme Court issued its decision in the infamous Plessy v. Ferguson case. And less than a mile away from the French Quarter is the location where Plessy was actually arrested for boarding a whites-only train car. Plessy v. Ferguson is a horrible, ugly part of New Orleans' past. But you will also see examples where New Orleans was cutting edge and progressive in some ways. For example, you will see this in the history of one of New Orleans' oldest neighborhoods, Treme, which has historically been a very diverse, culturally rich neighborhood, and also the location of America's very first civil rights movement, and also the location of the first black daily newspaper in America. Another part of New Orleans history involves cotton, which was of course produced with slave labor, and the sale of cotton has an interesting connection to dispute resolution. Just a few blocks away from the Sheraton Hotel is the building of the Old New Orleans Cotton Exchange. The Cotton Exchange was established in New Orleans during the 1800s, and this association, it helped facilitate a market for trading cotton. This association existed until about the 1960s, and the market, this cotton exchange, helped establish cotton pricing and also cotton quality standards. The Cotton Exchange involved thousands of transactions and millions of dollars every year. Most of the trading was apparently done without written contracts, and so disputes were inevitable with this volume of trading. And so the New Orleans Cotton Exchange created a standing committee on arbitration with an appellate arbitration tribunal to handle disputes arising from the exchange of cotton. involving prices or the quality or grading of cotton or the membership in the exchange. The New Orleans Cotton Exchange has been called the first major commodities market in the United States to establish such an arbitration system. And so arbitration was used to help facilitate this market, and you can easily see the traditional benefits associated with arbitration in this market, with the efficiency, speed, and cheap cost of a decision from the arbitration tribunal instead of bringing a suit in court. And the parties would also get the expertise of the decision maker. Also, this system of arbitration allowed the industry or trade group to enforce its own standards or norms. I've read arguments that arbitration tribunals in the cotton industry, they would allow for calculation of damages that a court would not use if the same dispute were brought to a court. And so arbitration enabled the group to implement its own standards. So you see a traditional use of arbitration here. And this has been recognized by many others, including the late Ian McNeill, but arbitration took root initially in America within communities or trade organizations, but today, with the enforceable nature of arbitration agreements from the Federal Arbitration Act, arbitration has been able to take root outside of this traditional setting of trade associations, so that you can now find arbitration agreements everywhere in American society. Regarding the New Orleans Cotton Exchange, the French impressionist Edgar Degas used to live in New Orleans for a while. He had relatives here in New Orleans who actually worked on the New Orleans Cotton Exchange. And so he painted this famous picture of the Cotton Exchange. And you can visit his home today. It's outside the French Quarter, and just a few blocks away from his home is the New Orleans Museum of Art, which also has several of his pieces. The New Orleans Museum of Art and the park in which it's located, City Park, are special places to visit. In the park, you will find a children's museum, an amusement park. You can also rent Surrey bikes for 4 people or 6 people, kayaks, paddle boats. It's a fun place to visit. There's also a beautiful outdoor sculpture garden. If you go through the main entrance of the park, you'll see the New Orleans Museum of Art directly in front of you. And if you look to the left of the museum, you will see a grand, majestic oak tree. And this oak tree has a fascinating history involving dispute resolution. This oak tree is known as the dueling oak. And this is hard for me to comprehend today. However, it was viewed as honorable and civil to resolve a dispute through dueling. And this is a location slightly outside of the French Quarter, outside the main city, where dueling took place in New Orleans. Another place I recommend visiting in New Orleans is the World War II Museum. One of the most significant events, and at the same time horrific events in all of human history, is World War II. And after the war, the promotion of peace led to many developments in our field of dispute resolution. And you may be wondering why a museum for World War II is located in New Orleans. And it's because the boats used during the D-Day invasion were developed and manufactured and tested here in the New Orleans area with our shallow bayous and lakes. I highly recommend a visit to the World War II Museum. In terms of how deeply a visit can impact you, I would say this museum ranks up there with any top museum in the world. In terms of innovation and improvisation, some themes of our annual meeting, I have to talk about New Orleans food and also our music. In terms of richness and variety of just delicious food, I cannot think of a better place in America to eat. And in terms of food history and innovation, there's something special about New Orleans. If you take the streetcar from the hotel area to the uptown area by the universities, there's a beautiful park known as Audubon Park, and I recommend it for jogging. They have a paved trail and a dirt trail there. And this also used to be a sugarcane plantation. The planter and owner was Antillon de Boré, and he fine-tuned and perfected the process for taking sugarcane juice and transforming it into granulated sugar. And with that innovation of granulated sugar, the food world has never been the same. And the growth of sugarcane and the production of sugar is still a major part of Louisiana's economy today. And so New Orleans and that particular site of Audubon Park played a role in the development and production of sugar. Aside from sugar and food, I would say the most special of New Orleans' contributions to the world, the most unique American art form, is jazz, which of course is filled with improvisation and innovation. And I recommend experiencing some New Orleans jazz when you're at the annual meeting. And right outside the French Quarter, there's Louis Armstrong Park, also known as Congo Square. And some say that this location helped contribute to the development of jazz in New Orleans. There is a tradition that people gathered here at Congo Square or Louis Armstrong Park on Sundays, slaves, free persons, and Native Americans, to celebrate, relax, dance, and play music. And you would have had a mix of Caribbean and African rhythms, blending together with strains of classical music learned from European settlers in the city. And so New Orleans is considered the cradle or birthplace of jazz. And finally, online, you should be able to find free maps for self-guided walking tours of several historical sites in different neighborhoods throughout the city. I hope you enjoy your time and your stay in New Orleans.